Hey, all right then. Hey, everybody, how you doing? So today we're gonna put a bunch of things together about resources and how we start to get to sustainability. So we'll talk about materials, waste, a little bit of law, and the key concept about all this is extended producer responsibility, or EPR. That's really the main function here of this lecture. Okay, so um, we're going to talk about materials that we have to go through all these processes to extract things from the environment and convert them into products. So we're going to talk about how we go from materials to products to use, and then finally things are discarded, right? Everything we consume is discarded. Everything you've ever seen made by a human will eventually get discarded. And I like to use the term discard because there's options, right? When something is discarded, it can then go into the waste stream. It could go into the meaning landfills or garbage disposal, something like that, or it could go into the recycling stream. It could be composted. It could be reused. So the discard stream, right? Discards multiple options: landfills, recycling, composting, landfill. So manufacturers then make products from these raw materials, and they do this by using manual labor or machines, and then that impacts the environment. These processes, happen everywhere around the world, from small villages and people to multinational factories that are using robots. Robots, by the way, are replacing a lot of jobs around the world and here in the United States. And we know that the leading manufacturers are China and Europe and the U.S. U.S. is still slightly number one, last I recall. And Japan is also among the leaders. So governments then, they regulate processes. We understand that. Some countries have more rules than others. And then internally, industries do things to self-regulate themselves through quality control and how they manage their staff. And that self-regulation thing is important when we start thinking about things like corporate social responsibility, or CSR. Will they choose to become more responsible? More on that later. But things can go wrong in the manufacturing process as products are made and food is produced. Perhaps you've heard about things like lettuce being recalled and other types of foods that are recalled because of some kind of contamination. So industry does this to help protect itself, while of course trying to protect consumers. Okay, so product liability then is producer responsibility. Later in this lecture, we're going to talk about extended producer responsibility. But product liability in general is where producer responsibility. So when we use this term extended, that means going beyond that, and we'll get into that again later in this lecture. Okay, so it's up to the manufacturers to make consistent products, technologically advanced. They like to keep up. As they keep up with technology, that makes them more competitive, and then that makes their prices more competitive. They can make higher quality products, and they can also choose then to manage their ethics. Okay, so it's a choice and a responsibility. But keep in mind, it's the legal system that is the ultimate arbitrator. And there's two elements of that. Part of the legal system is legislation, and then the other is through the courts, right? People often get these two things confused, but one is very different from the other, right? Remember, there are three branches of government. We have the Congress, and you have the president and the executive branch, and then you have the judicial branch. So here we're talking about that there is rules and regulations that are authorized by Congress and state legislators to agencies who then adopt regulations. And ultimately, even when these things fail, there is the court system where you and I can actually go to court and sue an industry for not being responsible. We'll have some more on that in just a bit. I'm not sure where this darn video of me is showing up, but here I am. Hello. I don't know if you see me or not. When I move that off the screen, there's really not much room there to have it. But okay, so let's talk about corporate social responsibility. It's a choice. Companies can choose to do this. Of course, elements of choice have changed as legislation comes in and require things like a 40-hour work week and a safe work environment. We have all those things, but the idea of CSR is to benefit consumer welfare, reduce negative impacts, but really the key thing is about reducing the liabilities to the corporation, improving their image, and by improving their image, they think that they will attract more consumers, more people buying their stuff, and which then maintains sales, improves their image, and then they hope that it helps maintain or even extend their profits. So the success of a company using CSR is largely determined by economics and ethics and education. What I mean by education is that some people are aware of such things, and then they will look for products that meet their ethics. My guess is that most people don't, and by most I mean, and I don't have any statistics, but there is such a thing as brand loyalty. But is there brand loyalty because of CSR? For some people there are. But I think when people are trying to save their money, they don't first vote with their ethics. They vote with their pocketbooks. In other words, trying to find the goods that they can afford. Okay, so ultimately products are discarded by consumers. That means it's going to go into a landfill. In the United States, it'll go to a landfill. In some places they have incineration or waste to energy. I want you to understand this is very rare, and the reason that it's rare is because it's extraordinarily expensive to burn garbage and convert it into energy. People often think that on a very fundamental level that garbage is bad and energy is good, and I can tell you that is profoundly wrong, right? And it's because we put a lot of energy into making the material in the first place. So when you burn a material, you burn all the things that it took to make it, and now you also create a high-tech problem because you have ash after you have waste to energy when you burn it, and that ash is going to be toxic because you don't necessarily know what's going to be in it. You might try to remove hazardous materials, but you're not going to get all of them. And so now this ash is a hazardous material and has to be disposed of in a hazardous waste landfill, which means it's much more expensive. And then you also lead to the problem of who wants to live next to one of these landfills that's full of toxic material. So the other option when discarding materials, of course, is reuse, where it can be used as something again or for someone again, or recycling, which means that you take the material, break it down to its constituent components, and make something else. So for example, you take paper or cardboard that we toss into our recycling bins, and then it's made into paper again. And then lastly is composting, where you take compostables like yard trimmings that will go and then is ground up and mulched. And in our county, Santa Clara County, the biggest market for that is in the San Joaquin Valley. So you end up getting that stuff back as your greens that you eat, your lettuce and stuff. Okay, so here's the key thing. Cities bear the cost of discarding materials. So who pays for throwing stuff away? Not the industry that made the stuff, but local government. So how does local government pay for it? Well, taxes and fees that they assess to me and you. So government then operates or pay for waste collection. They contract with the garbage companies. They determine how much money they're going to get. Cities will pay for, sometimes manage their own landfills. They have to, again, they tax how much stuff goes into landfills. That means the companies that bring garbage trucks to landfills have to pay a fee that goes to the cities to help pay for their costs. And so all those things are extracted from me and you. And curbside recycling. Curbside recycling does not recover its cost, not by far, because the markets are so poor, right? Markets for recyclables is just poor, and has been. Occasionally markets will go up, but that has primarily been because of demand driven by China, which had been the largest market for recyclables. And we're not going to get into why that's a problem today, but essentially China is accepting many fewer materials, primarily because they want high quality materials, and our country's not able to produce the materials at the quality that they require. So it's your taxes then that pay for all the stuff that we throw, quote unquote, away, and the staff and the operations and managing contracts and the haulers, and even lawsuits, because you have people that will sue garbage companies or sue the city for one reason or another, or sue the city because they live near a landfill. And where does the city money come from to pay a lawsuit? You and I. To some extent insurance, but ultimately it's you and I. So the point is that we live with the consequence of throwing stuff away. And it's industry that makes this stuff. So we're going to look into that on this concept of extended producer responsibility. So the other thing to understand here is that it's local government that has an economic interest to reduce landfilled or incinerated materials. Why? Because it saves them money, right? Okay, so what about the waste problem? So the world, right, is generating about 2 billion tons of municipal solid waste every year. So that's about 33%, right, of, or about 33% of that is not managed in an environmentally safe manner. That means there's no formal collection, no formal management of discharge, no landfills, no open dumping, or there is open dumping. So when you see on the internet or television this problem of all these plastics in the environment, I can tell you that where most of them are coming from, these countries that have very poor management systems or have none at all. And why don't they have it? Because they're poor, right? Now that's not to say that we don't have that problem here in the U.S., because we do, right? We still have this significant litter problem, but this is a global problem, and it's worse with countries that don't have formal collection of waste. So engineers have designed landfills, and we have requirements for engineered landfills in the United States, and we have these formal garbage collection programs, which is great for us in the U.S. and other more developed countries, like all those in Europe. So the world's generated waste is about, it's over 1.5 pounds a day, and it ranges widely. So it's very difficult to get this data, but it could be as little as 1/4 pound to as much as 10 pounds per person per day. Here in the U.S., there's been a lot of studies that's done by the company called Franklin and Associates for years and years. I mean, as long as I've been looking at this stuff, 30-some years, it's been done by Franklin Associates. And today, the estimate is about 4.5 pounds of garbage per person per day in the United States. So think about that. I mean, there's 326 million people in the United States generating 4.5 pounds of waste each day. So that's a lot of resources that are extracted from the environment, processed, have to apply energy and materials to then make something that eventually we throw, quote unquote, away. And we know, because of the law of conservation of matter, law of conservation of energy, there's no such thing as a waste. So when you throw stuff away, we are creating a pollutant. So there's two choices. Materials become a pollutant, or they become a resource. And where most of this stuff is going is into landfills, which means that they become pollutants. Okay, so that's waste generation. So that's when stuff is then discarded. After it's generated, it can go into the recycling stream or others. Okay, so we expect that global waste is going to more than double the population growth over the next few years, next few decades. And why? Because you have urbanization, meaning more people are moving into cities around the world. We have growing population, and we have growing affluence. So what's affluence? It's wealth, right? The more money you have, typically the more stuff you buy. The more stuff you buy means the more stuff you throw away. That's all it means. And we know that with globalization, we've been making efforts to reduce poverty, and that's been successful. There's been a huge reduction in poverty, and that's because of rising affluence, which means overall more consumption. So, so the daily per capita waste generation in high-income countries is projected to increase by about pretty close to 20% by the year 2050, and in low and middle income countries, it will increase by as much as 40%, and perhaps even more than that. So what I'm pointing out is that the problem is going to get worse, right? We're not seeing evidence that the problems will be reduced. And again, in these lower income countries, it could increase by as much as by 3 times. So this is looking like a major challenge throughout the world, and that has implications then for the environment, because we extract more resources, process more resources, make more pollutants, destroy more open space, destroy more habitats for plants and animals, and so that reduces things like it's basically the surgical removal of lungs of the earth that convert carbon dioxide into oxygen. So, in short, we've got a problem and we need to deal with it. This is really about more data about consumption and waste, and that high-income countries like the U.S. and Europe, we're generating about 1/3 of the world's waste, and East Asia and the Pacific generate about 23%. Sub-Saharan Africa is expected to triple as poverty is reduced there. South Asia is expected to more than double. By the way, all this information comes from the World Bank, a report that's listed down below here. And through all this stuff, one of the key problems, of course, is plastics. We use plastics because they're cheap and effective, right? They're a great packaging material because they do a really good job protecting products, which means that products last longer. You don't have as much damage, which means there's less waste, which seems kind of odd, but it's true. The key problem with plastics, frankly, is that they are a litter problem because they have very little economic value to being recycled. So, you don't throw away gold and jewels and things of value because they have value. But when something doesn't have value, it's trash. That's why you call your ex-girlfriend or your ex-boyfriend, hey, you're trash, because they have no value to you anymore. All right, maybe that's cruel, but that's what people sometimes will say out of being women because they're just angry. But plastics, when they don't have any value, they become a pollutant. So the key thing is, how do you add value, right? Where does that come from? And it's estimated that in 2016, just a few years ago, there was about 242 million tons of plastic waste, about 12% of all solid waste, and it's been growing. Okay, so this shows you some waste generation by region, and you can see here's the Middle East, Sub-Saharan Africa. These 3 different colors indicate here's 2016, and then 2030, and then 2050. So you see that in all cases, we expect to see increases in waste generation. And then in terms of waste collection, right, we see that that there's more waste collected in higher income areas, so more developed countries, yet the lesser developed countries have less waste that's collected, which means that more waste becomes litter. Okay, so and what are we throwing away? There's a lot of food, green materials, meaning like yard trimmings, that kind of thing. Glass and metal, they've been declining. Other means stuff like inerts, different things that are can't be categorized. Paper and cardboard are significant, and plastics have been growing for quite a while. And then you have rubber, leather, and wood. Food and green waste tend to be the largest, and what's key about that is that that stuff can be composted, so you keep it out of landfills. So it can be composted, and then you use the compost in agriculture. So the World Bank, in this report that they wrote called What a Waste, what it stresses is that solid waste management is critical for sustainable, healthy, and inclusive cities and communities, yet it's often overlooked, right? Garbage you throw away. I mean, you think out of sight, out of mind, right? So when we throw stuff away, we also then create carbon dioxide. So the emissions from solid waste is estimated to be about 5%. And what we understand here is that good waste management systems are essential to building a circular economy. So if we're going to close open loops, we're going to go from linear to cyclical, we need to find mechanisms. So products have to be designed in a way that optimize reuse and recycling. So that would mean that packaging has to be a single material, not multiple materials, because it's easier to recycle a single material rather than when something is mixed, right? The cost of addressing these impacts was going to be many times higher than the cost of developing and operating simple, adequate waste management systems. So the key is then who's going to bear these costs? How do we do this, right? So the World Bank is aware of this problem and is suggesting that we make some solutions. Move myself down here so you can see this. So according to the World Bank, we need to support countries to make solid waste management solutions, so we can finance them, finance policy and planning decisions to implement them, to basically reduce waste and create recycling programs. But is that going to be enough? And I can tell you the answer to that, from my perspective, is absolutely not. And why? Because waste is an economic problem. Why do we call it waste? Again, because it has no economic development. So the only way we can create solutions is to create markets for things that are thrown away. So we overlook the role of industry to close the loop. They made the problem, right? And so the public has to pay for the problem, and the environment does. And you have areas that can't pay for waste management, then it becomes litter, which then goes into the environment. Shouldn't be too hard to understand this. So recycling requires markets. Markets equal value. If you don't have markets, you don't have value, and then you have trash and you have litter. I guess I should add that down here, right? Okay. So in the U.S., waste has been fairly steady for a while. We're still generating about 4.5 pounds per person per day, but it's about close to 300 million tons a year. And recycling has been going up a little bit. Then it kind of got static, but we're not going to get into that too much. I don't want to get into those details in this course at this time. But the categories of waste, now that's important, because if we're trying to solve this problem of we're taking all these resources with the global distribution of goods, and much of it is getting wasted. So what exactly are we talking about? What are these products? So they're durable goods, non-durable goods, containers and packaging, and that's what we're going to focus on. Then there's food and yard trimmings. These are categories created by the U.S. EPA and their consultant, Franklin Associates. So let's look at some of that data. So look at this. Containers and packaging is about 30% of the waste stream. 30%, right? Now, I know that's difficult to see this, but maybe later you can come and you can enlarge this so you can see those stats. But plastics or packaging is about 30% and been pretty standard for a number, steady for a number of years. But it's about 30% of the waste stream. So, it seems clear that this is an area that should be addressed to try to reduce the scope of this problem. And so if about 30% is being generated, then where's it going? Well, about 21% of the stuff that is landfilled comes from containers and packaging. So containers and packaging, let me state this another way, is about 21% of everything that we throw away. So I think it's pretty obvious that this represents a significant opportunity to reduce waste and reduce negative environmental impacts. So another thing then we could look at what are the categories of packaging? Glass, steel, aluminum, paper, paperboard, plastics. Can we recycle these things? Absolutely. Are these things renewable or non-renewable? They're all non-renewable resources with the exception of paper and paperboard, which is renewable because it comes from trees and it can be made from other organic materials as well. So lots of opportunity here. So what should we do, right? Where do we start to reduce these environmental impacts of materials? Well, many people will think that the actions by individuals is more important. And I want to point out to you that that's just not true. What you choose to do as an individual is an expression of your ethic. And typically, when I'm talking with somebody about, well, is it really important what you do, your impact? And they'll say, well, yeah, it is if everyone does it. Well, how likely is that? Because people don't share our ethics, right? So I choose to do a lot of recycling at my house. I choose to have double pane windows. I choose to have to live near where I work so I don't have to commute as much. But nonetheless, we're still producing 4.5 pounds of garbage per person per day. So let's look at what is more effective, action by individuals or institutions. And I'm taking all this to lead you into an argument, and you'll see that at the end here. So individuals believe, or people believe, that individuals can take personal action by using fewer materials, turning the heat down, or turn the AC down, turn it off when you're not leaving home, be a vegetarian, buy stuff in bulk, buy organic, bringing a bag, use compostable plastics, which is a major problem, or not a major, but it's just not true that compostable plastics create any sort of a real solution. And you can see me offline about that. Other personal actions about taking the bus, commuting with others, buying carbon credits if you take an airplane somewhere, replacing your car with an electric car, buying with ethics, recycle right by separating materials carefully, using less water, turn the lights off, and using xeriscaping, meaning plants that use less water, plants that are indigenous to an area. So all of these are personal choices, and some of us have the ability to make some of those choices and others don't, and then others won't even consider these things. I've had many students tell me about how they try to get their boyfriend or girlfriend to recycle and they just won't, or and so sometimes they change, sometimes they don't. The point is that people are fickle, and it's hard to get people to change behavior and then to stay with that. They get what's called recycling fatigue. They start to recycle correctly for a while, then after a while they don't. Okay, so So how we live then is an expression of our personal experiences, and so you may consume less because of your ethics, because of how you grew up, who your peer groups were, what you've heard in your from your people that you follow with religion. And then for some of us, the more we get educated, the more we choose not to do something. Many people are vegetarians because they learn about what happens with how meat is produced, so they choose to no longer eat meat. My daughters have done that. Not me, though. But changing behaviors is oftentimes difficult, or it can be. So then the next thing is like, well, should institutions do things to try to change behavior? So I can tell you that, yeah, government does it. I've been part of a government group for 30 years in public education programs that they want to do. And they'll run a campaign for a short while to try to encourage people to recycle right, or use reusable bags and things like that. But all this costs money. So if you're going to try to change behaviors, how do you do that, right? Who's going to pay for it? How is it organized? Who gets paid to do the work? Will the behavior stick? Is there any measurement of the outcomes that the ad was actually effective because there was a change? So let's look at an element about organizations. So in societies, the work of a society is accomplished largely through organizations, right? So that means businesses and governments and non-governmental organizations. The role of management, which could be used someday, is to see to it that organizations perform well and meet existing and emerging challenges. So I manage an operation, right? I have paid staff, and I want them to all be part of this, and it's our job to meet existing and emerging challenges. So in addition to being your professor, I think you know that I run the recycling hotline and website for 2 counties. So we're serving 3 million people with students, which, by the way, you can join us and get academic credit. And then I hire people from time to time as my paid student managers graduate. So management and organizational behavior is central to the management task, because the people in an organization have to understand the behavior patterns, and understand what, and then they have to make predictions and understand how the predictions can be used to achieve, and I hate to say it, but it's true, control. Because what you're trying to do, like in our situation with waste, how can we reduce waste, right? And you're trying to achieve control in a way that so that you get the needed outcome. The entire electronics industry works this way. All your social media works this way. They're trying to control your behavior. You're fed news that reflects the material or the searches that you've typed into your search engine, and then they try to market you to these things. So they're trying to control you, and oftentimes we don't even realize that we're being controlled. So enough of that. But I'm just trying to point out the importance of an organization that work gets done because of the people that work in it, and then trying to change a behavior or affect an action. You can get degrees in this area. So the larger impact, right? Let's talk about actions by institutions. So in our case, what we want to do is use, what is the most effective way to affect change and reduce negative environmental impacts, particularly as it relates to consumption. So the problem again is consumption and disposal. So it's disposal of stuff, right? So how do we affect that? Is it through individuals, or is it going to be through institutions? So let's talk about some impacts that have happened because of the actions by institutions. So plastic bags undoubtedly is an environmental problem. It's a litter problem. It's a persistent pollutant because it's made of plastic. It's non-renewable. There's a teeny tiny recycling market, so there's no one really wants, or very few industries are going to pay for what's called film plastic. And so as a result, it became a major pollutant problem. And so what some states have done, like ours, we basically banned it. You can still get plastic bags, but you'll have to pay for it at the store, right? They can't give it away free anymore. And so that has resulted in this huge reduction in the amount of plastic bags. So there was a piece of legislation that was passed, SB 270, and then there was a proposition that was approved by the voters. Strangely enough, and I say strangely enough because some of us are thinking like, oh my gosh, would people actually agree to do this? But they did, right? They actually did, and industry fought hard to defeat it, but industry lost. So and there's information if you want to read more about this. You can click on these links and go to the Cal Recycle website. So there's an organization called Californians Against Waste, and they estimate that we had 30 billion plastic bags that were used in California in 2005. By 2014, that was down to 13 billion, and that was because of cities that had been enacted laws such as those in San Francisco and Santa Clara County and Palo Alto. And then after Prop 67 was passed, even more. So what I'm telling you is that the action by an institution resulted in literally billions of fewer pollutants in the form of plastic bags going into the environment. Still not convinced? Let's talk about another. Look at this data here. Let me move this so you can see that plastic bag use. This is in L.A., California, and L.A. County, and see this massive drop here, and then even more after the 2016 ban. So a lot of this happened here in L.A. because L.A. passed a ban. And that, frankly, one of the reasons that Prop 67 passed was because so many counties, many people in the state were already covered by a ban. So it made more sense to have a statewide ban rather than one that was going to be by committee or by county. Okay. Phasing out of plastic bags reduced pollution, right? That's the key thing. And here's an example or some data about pollution reduction. So at the Coastal Cleanup Day, this is a collection event, the plastics bags had been a major source of pollution. They made up about 7.5% of all the litter that they collected, and then it dropped to less than 1.5%. So plastic litter dropped by 72%. So that's pretty awesome. It shows you the impact. And I can tell you that legislatively there's been other efforts on some of the major pollutants that exist now, which are cigarette butts, you see right here, and fast food packaging. So, and cigarette butts, that legislation keeps failing, probably because of the amount of money that the cigarette industry is putting into legislators so that they will not support that. But in terms of fast food packaging, well, Santa Clara County, where we are, where San Jose State is, banned polystyrene. You know it probably better as styrofoam. San Jose adopted theirs. Palo Alto and other cities within Santa Clara County, and then the county itself. Think of the county as the county of unincorporated, so areas that aren't part of cities within the county. At any rate, essentially our entire county and all the cities in our county have all voted to ban polystyrene, and that's because it's a pollutant, a persistent pollutant, and it's difficult to recycle. Is there a market? Yes, but that market is poor, and so the easier solution for local government, frankly, was to ban it. And industry then has responded. So they have adopted bans on bans, right? So they have convinced other states and communities around the country to not allow the banning of their product. So this is a political argument, and I'm just trying to point out that you're going to have industry that fights for the one thing that they are, which is they want to protect their industry. Their concern is not the environment, it is to protect their industry. And so one of the ways they can do that is to have a ban on banning their product. Does that make sense? I hope you understand it, even though in many ways it doesn't make any ethical sense because it doesn't help solve a problem. Here's another example, and something that I worked on in the 1980s, and then I did some more work on it in when did I do that? In the late 2000s. But it's about water and shower heads. So I worked on a program to create basically a regulation in California that regulated how much water came out of shower heads. So yeah, I'm the guy who's responsible for that. Shower heads went from 5 to 7 gallons a minute to 2.75 in 1984. So in terms of water usage, we cut in half how much water was being consumed when people take showers, which meant that you reduce the sewage by half. Which, by the way, that's why we did it. We didn't do it to save water. We did it to reduce sewage. And when you save water in showers, you also reduce the amount of natural gas that's used to heat water. So there's also fewer greenhouse gas emissions. Although back in 1984, I don't even think we gave greenhouse emissions a thought. Okay, so shower heads are going to use even less water. In 2016, where legislation was passed, and so we're going to give time for the stocks of these existing stocks to eventually be depleted, and then after that, we expect that these regulations are going to save another 38 billion gallons of water, over 20 billion cubic feet of natural gas. That means less greenhouse gas emissions as well. Or fewer greenhouse gas emissions, lots of electricity that would be saved, and of course, if you're saving water, you're also reducing sewage. If you're reducing sewage, you're reducing the amount of water that has to be treated by local government. Another example is corporate fuel economy standards. So as a government, we passed legislation to reduce the amount of fuel that automobiles consume. And so this is automatic. You buy a car and you're using less fuel than you would have if you bought a car in the 70s. And so that reduced America's consumption of oil. It saved everyone money. It helped protect public health. It reduces air pollutants, reduced greenhouse gases. It spurred investments in automobile technology to make more fuel-efficient vehicles. Oil consumption went down. Jobs went up. There were more jobs that were created, and the environment benefits, as I said earlier, because there's fewer greenhouse gas emissions and less pollution. So yeah, all good, right? So what I'm getting at here is this concept of find a good place for this, is manufacturer responsibility. Manufacturers have to fulfill the promises that they make, that products work safe, and that they live up to the brand reputation. What they don't have to think about is how to discard their product and or their packaging at the end of its life, right? Manufacturers have to ensure the purity and safety of their product. They will be concerned about liability, right? They have responsibilities for the other products that they are safe to use and consume. So tools and appliances, for example, food that you buy. There's this, famous book, The Jungle by Upton Sinclair, was about the meat processing of meat and how unsanitary it was. Back in I think it was the 30s, which led to regulations that were created. So still today, when the regulations don't go far enough, then you have producer responsibility through law, meaning torts, right? Tort law is an area of the law that covers most civil suits. So I spent some time in law school. I never finished law school, but I took this course. And generally, claims about any claim where there's disagreements turned into a tort, except for contract. Contracts is a separate component of law. So the concept here is redress a wrong that's done to a person and then provide relief for a wrongful act of others or because of the product. And then the result is the reward of a monetary damage, or monetary damages as compensation. So we call that restorative justice. So in other words, if, for example, when a car runs into your car and you get injured, then you sue and you get monetary damages. If your airbag comes on and it's a defective airbag, and then you have further personal injury, then you use tort laws to get compensated. So that's an example of this. Okay, so when laws don't protect people from industry, then torts are used as a mechanism for compensation. So businesses have an incentive then to avoid torts. And how do you avoid torts? Responsibility, right? So they try to make products safer to avoid being sued. So there's different types of torts, and I'm not going to get into all the levels of detail, but if you want to know, here they are, right? So you can learn more about torts if you're interested in stuff like becoming a lawyer someday. So now what I want to do is to bring this whole discussion back to extended producer responsibility. So we've talked about the problem, waste. We talked about the problem of waste. We've talked about how do we address these problems through individuals or through institutional action. We've discussed producer responsibility, the actions that industry has to take, and now let's then use those to talk about extended producer responsibility. So the idea here is that we place a shared responsibility for the end-of-life product management on the producers and other entities in the supply chain. Why? Because the only language they speak is money. The only language they understand is money, right? Why do they behave better? Because of regulations and torts, right? What do those affect? Money, right? So the idea here is that it takes responsibility of product discards from the general public, which is you and I and our local government, which you and I support with our tax dollars. And it places the responsibility on the producer or the brand owner who makes the design and they make the marketing decisions. It encourages product design that changes and minimizes negative environmental impacts, right? And it allows the cost of processing and disposal of that product to be incorporated in the cost of that product, meaning that the people who buy that product end up having to pay for all the costs and not all the rest of us. It internalizes an externality. And lastly, it creates a market, because it's markets that make the world go round, right? And will close the loop, and we go from a linear system of managing a product, right, from extraction of resources to processing of resources to discard into the environment as a landfill material, to a cycle where that material now is, when it's discarded, goes into the recycling stream. So now the manufacturer has an encouragement to improve the quality of that packaging so that it's entirely recyclable, so they can reduce their cost. So EPR speaks the language of business, right? and it incentivizes the recovery of materials. Like I said, it internalizes externalities. Simply, what does that mean? It means that if you make something, you take it. If you make it, you take it. And you wouldn't necessarily collect it directly yourself. Companies would then have to make packaging out of recycled content material. That would help support recycling markets, so they would all be putting their efforts into that. So it maximizes solutions throughout the entire supply chain. Will help meet human needs. We create more jobs. By having more jobs, we can reduce poverty. We can reduce pollution because we are recycling these materials. We have less resource extraction because we are recycling non-renewable resources, and we're averting ecological disaster at the same time because we're reducing pollutants and greenhouse gases. We close the loop, and we speak the language that the government should like as well, because it reduced the cost of government. Now, no surprise, it's opposed by industry. They don't like it, right? They don't like it because, why? The only language they speak is money, and it means that it would be a cost to them. So how would this work? You have a manufacturing industry that makes something. In this case, could be like a beer or soda or some kind of a product that we drink. It gets made. We consume it. The consumer then it goes to a recycling facility, your curbside recycling, and then it can go right back to the filler. And so you eliminate many of these steps. Some of the stuff might go to recovery facility, can be made into other types of products, and so now we have a loop. Pretty awesome, right? Okay. So are we doing this? The answer is yes. So here's some examples of EPR programs. And let me tell you, right, because I've been part of many of these. Why do these things exist? Because it's local government that has to pay these costs. So local government has had the things that are the major problems that they've been focusing on that they want industry to be responsible for. So it's local governments who've worked together to pass legislation. It hasn't really been efforts from individuals encouraging their lawmakers. It's been local government that has put this together, including one of my former students who was responsible for creating the partly responsible. He was one of the members of the CPSC. I always have a problem remembering their website. I'll try to find it and get it to you. So here are some examples. So paint was the largest item that was collected at household hazardous waste programs, and so that was taken into effect, and that greatly reduced the amount of money that local government was paying to manage paint. Carpet, one of the a very troublesome item at landfills, and so now if you manufacture carpet, they essentially have to have mechanisms to take it back. Mercury thermostats, because mercury is a hazardous material. And then the bottle bill, because that was passed in the '86. And I remember being looking at all that and being I had been involved in some elements of that. But essentially, the largest littered item by quantity in California was bottles and cans. And so the Bottle Bill Act was essentially to reduce litter, which it has been extraordinarily successful. Why was it successful? It's really simple. Because it's got a value on cans and bottles. When you put a value on it, it's no longer litter, and now it's commodity. So people collect them and return them for money. Although there's problems with that bill for sure, but I won't get into that. Other EPR programs, pharmaceuticals and sharps. Santa Clara County is one of the best programs for the collection of these. You can go to my website, recyclestuff.org, where I have information on how you can discard any unused pharmaceuticals and sharps. Basically, bring them to drugstores where there's kiosks, and you can just drop them in there. And Another one has been pesticide containers. You'll see that here. That's what these images are, about basically triple rinsing them to recycle all this plastic, which before had gone to landfills. So what's missing through all this? Packaging EPR. Yes, we're back with our concept about packaging. So we had talked about packaging, and that is over 20% of the material that's going into landfills. So it has become a target, but as a material, and industry's aware of that. They don't necessarily want that to happen. But many states and many nations have adopted laws on EPR. So here are some here. And so the most well-known of these, of course, is the dual system Deutschland of it's in Germany, and which is expanded into throughout Europe. And so the DSD collects packaging materials, and it's greatly reduced the amount of materials that are being discarded. In nearly every city or every country that is using the DSD have met and exceeded their recovery goals. And the things that are recovered most, no surprise, paper and cardboard, easier to recycle, right? Okay, so will EPR then expand globally? You know, our course is globalization and the environment. We understand then that packaging represents a significant problem, and what appears to be the ultimate solution is the creation of markets, and the way to create markets, frankly, is through extended producer responsibility. That industry we have to speak the language of industry, which is money, and by doing that, industry can then reduce the problem. And we have proof now that it works because of Europe, right? And DSD, we know that EPR works. So what is going to be the driving force, right, to change our actions? Will it be the plastics pollution problem? Do we need to see more pictures of turtles with straws stuck in their nose? Is that what's going to drive the actions? Will trade organizations choose to act through the WTO, requiring all industries that are involved in the WTO to actually consider the environment and require that packaging be recyclable and made of recycled content? Will more states adopt EPR legislation, including packaging? California, will California pass a law on packaging? And if we do, because we're so important, right, and what I mean by that is economically important. California is the 6th, 7th largest economy. So what California does greatly influences the market. And so will California do something that then will affect the rest of the world? That could be, right? What Germany did with the DSD affected the rest of Europe. So will the political influence of industry overcome all of the interests of the governments and people and the movement towards sustainability? Because that's what their argument will be, right? So which is going to work out? Will the interests of people and planet prevail, or will the interests of business and profit prevail? To a large degree, that's going to be up to me and you. So, as Churchill said, it's not enough that we do our best. Sometimes we must do what's required. It seems pretty clear this is required. Thanks, everyone. Have a great day.